Okay, there was a printout that Kaiti was... Oh, do you have copies of the printout? Oh, okay. Okay, they were to be sent out with the announcement of the class, so I think most people would have gotten them. But if there are any people, if there's any person who needs a copy, Kaiti will bring a few more. Okay, so the sutta we're taking today is sutta number 60 in the Middle Age Discourses. This is called the Apannaka Sutta. Okay, so we are on page 506. So the Apannaka Sutta, the word Apannaka, it's explained by, it's a very unusual word, but it's explained by the commentary to have the meaning of certain, definite, unambiguous, but here it's rendered incontrovertible. And what is sort of going to be explained in the sutta is a little bit like a Buddha's counterpart to, do you know the expression Pascal's wager, Pascal's bet? Pascal was a French philosopher, theologian, I think of the 17th century. And he was considering, the article of Catholic faith is that you have to believe in God. So he was considering whether one should believe in God or not. And the consequence is that, I guess he was confronted with some scientific facts which seemed to undermine the existence of God, maybe some logical reasoning which seemed to refute belief in the existence of God. So he reflected and he considered, what is the consequence of believing in God? Well, if God does exist and you believe in God and in the tenets of the Catholic faith, then you get eternal life in heaven. If God doesn't exist and you believe in God, well, you just have a false belief and you could live a moral life. And when you die, then everything comes to an end. But if you don't believe in God and God exists, then according to the belief of Christianity, then you get consigned to hell forever. And so then you have to spend eternity in hell. Whereas if God does exist and you do believe, if God does exist and you do believe in God, then you get to spend eternity in heaven. So, reflecting logically in that way, it makes sense to believe in God. Okay, so this will be the Buddha's reflection, not so much not on the question whether or not one should believe in God, but whether or not it makes sense to believe in teachings like rebirth and karma. Okay, so when the sutta begins, the Buddha has been traveling through the coastal country, and he arrives at a Brahmin village in the coastal country named Sala. Okay, so now the Brahmin householders of Sala hear that the Buddha has arrived in their town, and so they hear a favorable report about him, and they decide to go to visit him. And presumably, at the beginning of this discourse, the Brahmins of Sala are not followers of the Buddha. So they don't have a convinced faith in him, but they're interested to hear his teaching. Okay, so they come to the Buddha, and then some pay homage to the Buddha and sit down to one side. Those are the ones who know basic principles of courtesy and respect. Some exchange friendly greetings with him, and then sit down to one side. Others they do gasho, what's called gasho in Japanese, or anjali in Pali and Sanskrit, and the gesture of reverential salutation, and sit down to one side. Some just declare their names and sit down on one side, and then some, these are probably the skeptics, the cynics, who just want to hear what this wandering ascetic has to say, they just keep silent and sit down to one side. Okay, so then when they're seated, then the Buddha asks them whether they have any kind of definite faith in a spiritual teacher, a faith which is supported by reasons. And so the Brahmins say that they have no convinced faith in any particular teacher. And so now the Buddha is going to give them a teaching which will be appropriate for them in their present situation. Notice he's not going to try to lay the Four Noble Truths on them, to teach them about the three characteristics, impermanence, suffering, non-self. He's not going to teach them dependent origination. These are the deep dharmas specific to the Buddha. But what the Buddha is going to try to do is to give them a teaching which, if they reflect on this teaching properly, according to the lines he's going to lay down, they'll find reasonable to accept and to use as a basis for their conduct. And so this method of reflection that the Buddha is going to teach them will be able to lead them, to guide them to proper types of conduct which will lead to their welfare and happiness for a long time. So at this point, the Buddha is not yet intent on trying to give them a teaching that's going to lead them to liberation, to nibbana, to enlightenment, but just to give them a kind of template of a basic understanding that they can use as the foundation for ethical conduct and that will promote their well-being and happiness in this life and in future lives. If some of them, through listening to the Buddha, then gain trust and confidence in the Buddha and open their minds to understand the deeper teaching, then the Buddha will systematically present to them the teachings that lead to liberation. But at this point, these Brahmin householders, are not yet ready for those types of teachings. Okay, so now what the Buddha is going to do initially is to lay out three types of views which are set in contrasting pairs of a wrong view and the corresponding type of right view. And the three types of wrong view are called, I think this is a commentarial expression, niyata micchaditthi. I'll write that. Micchaditthi means wrong view, and niyata means fixed or definite. So these are the fixed, definite types of wrong view, and they're called fixed and definite because when one adopts this type of view and holds to it strongly, becomes completely convinced about it, it blocks off the pathways to a higher rebirth and to eventual liberation. And then these three types of wrong views are going to be contrasted in each section with the corresponding type of right view. Okay, so the Buddha begins in the first section. I've sort of mapped these out on this handout. So the first type of wrong view is called, we translate it as nihilism, The Pali expression here, natikavada, means literally the view there is not, or it's a kind of denialist view, the view that denies certain sort of fixed principles of the ethical life, especially against the background of the Buddha's time. Okay, so here comes this first type of wrong view, the view of nihilism. This asserts there is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed or given in charity. Of course, this is not denying that one person can give anything to another, but what it is denying is that there is any benefit, any justification for such actions as giving out of faith and trust to others, giving out of compassion or kindness to others, making offerings, giving in charity. There is no fruit or result of good and bad actions. So there are actions which we judge conventionally to be good, wholesome, worthy actions. Other actions are judged to be bad, unwholesome, unworthy actions. And what these teachers are saying is that these good and bad actions don't have any kind of karmic result. In other words, there's no law of karma that underlies the operation of human activity to ensure that good actions produce happiness and bad actions lead to suffering. Okay, the next seems a little bit strange. There is not this world, there is not another world. Actually, these teachers, of course, they don't deny that this world exists, but what this means is that there's no coming back in the form of rebirth, coming back into this world, and no taking rebirth in any other world beyond this. What they would probably say is this world of solid matter, made up of the four elements, that is the only world that exists, and when you die, everything is finished, the body just disintegrates into the material elements, it gets buried, burned, scattered to the winds, and everything is finished. Okay, there is no mother and no father. Of course, you might think that these ascetics, having maybe renounced in childhood, don't have any understanding of how children come into the world. But that's not the reason why they make this statement. But what they're saying is that there's no obligation or no kind of ethical duty to support one's mother and father. There's no gratitude, no debt of gratitude due to one's mother and father. Okay, the next phrase I had translated, there are no beings who are reborn spontaneously, but I have to revise that translation. The Pali word here that's been translated, beings who are reborn spontaneously, in some contexts, this word has that special meaning of beings who are reborn in some of the heavenly worlds, also in the hell realms, without any parents, but they just arise instantaneously, spontaneously. But here I checked the commentary on this just earlier this morning, and I found that the commentary says that here the word Upapatika means simply that there are no beings who are reborn. So in other words, they simply deny that there are any beings who, after passing away, take rebirth. And then they say that there are no good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have themselves realized by direct knowledge the nature of this world and the other world, and can explain them and teach them on the basis of their own personal knowledge. So in other words, here they're denying that there are any spiritual renunciants who have achieved superior knowledge, abhinyas, by which they can see the workings of the law of karma, the different realms of existence, and how beings take rebirth in accordance with their deeds. Okay, so that is the thesis of nihilism, or Natikavada, the denial, basically, that good and bad deeds bring their results, or we could say it's a philosophical materialism which holds that a person consists only of the material factors, and that with death there comes a complete termination of consciousness, mind, personal existence, that everything is terminated with death. And you find in the Majjhima Nikāya there's also a full statement of this view in Sutta number 76. You can look that up on your own. Okay, now the opposite of the nihilist position is the doctrine of, here, use a rather unwieldy expression, affirmationism, or simply in Pali, Attikavada means the doctrine there is, the doctrine of existence. And this is simply the exact opposite in all respects of the doctrine of nihilism. So these ascetics who hold this doctrine say there is what is given, offered, what is given in charity. There's the fruit and result of good and bad deeds. There is this world. There's rebirth into this world and into other worlds. There is virtue in looking after and supporting and helping one's mother and father. There is a rebirth that takes place after death, and so beings are reborn. And there are good and virtuous ascetics and Brahmins who have realized for themselves the nature of this world and the world beyond, and can explain them on the basis of their personal knowledge. Okay, so these two different types of teachers hold doctrines that are diametrically opposed to one another. Okay, so now the Buddha is at this section that I marked 7a1. The Buddha is going to now enter into an examination first of the doctrine of nihilism, the doctrine of annihilation. So he says that if an ascetic or Brahmin teaches a doctrine like this, first we look what will be the likely effect on their conduct. And he says, if we consider this, it is to be expected that they will avoid 3 types of wholesome qualities, that is, good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct, and that they will undertake and practice 3 types of unwholesome states or unwholesome lines of conduct, that is, bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. And then the Buddha gives the reason why this particular view will lead to this type of conduct. The reason is that these ascetics and Brahmins do not see in unwholesome qualities or unwholesome actions the danger, degradation, and defilement, nor do they see in wholesome qualities the blessing of renunciation, the aspect of cleansing. In this line of reflection, it occurs to me, with regard to this line of reflection, that it seems to be set against the the culture in India in the time of the Buddha. And in some respects, it doesn't completely correspond, in my own experience, to the way things work out in the contemporary age. Because I know quite a number of people who don't believe in any existence beyond the present one, who don't believe in that there's something like a law of karma which ensures that the actions we do in this life will produce results in some future life, either happiness or suffering. And yet, these people uphold very high standards of ethical conduct, not based on considering what will be the consequences for myself in some future life, but just what does my conscience tell me about how I should act in relation to other human beings, other living creatures, the natural environment in this life here and now. So I think the reflection that we have here maybe shouldn't be taken to be universally applicable under all conditions, applicable to all cultures, to all periods of human history. But it seems that perhaps during the Buddha's time, almost every sort of decent, respectable, upright person was expected to accept a doctrine of lives beyond the present one, and to accept the teaching of karma and rebirth. And so if somebody forcefully and insistently rejected those doctrines, one could suspect that they would tend to engage in unwholesome types of behavior. Does anybody have any comments about this?
Well, I would think that would tend to be true in a Brahmin society, because if you did not follow the conceptions of the priests and so on, then you would be outcast from society generally. That is, you'd be beyond the pale, and so you would be in a hostile relationship to all your relatives.
Yeah. Though also it's a little bit curious that the text says that there are some recluses and Brahmins whose doctrine, whose view and doctrine is this, that there is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed, and so on. And the one to whom this position is assigned, Ajita Kesa Kampali, no, he doesn't seem to have been a Brahmin, but it seems that there could have been Brahmins who did make this assertion.
I think it's the Lokayata school, isn't it?
Actually, that's right. It was the Lokayata, yeah, which means the materialists. And somebody else had their hand up on this side.
I just had a translation question.
Yeah.
Where you're using the word beings, being reborn or not being reborn, what's the pattern that you recall, Conte?
The word that's rendered beings?
Yeah.
It's Sutta, or Sanskrit Sattva. S-A-T-T-V-A. That's the Sanskrit. S-A-T-T-A is the Pali.
And is that literally beings, or if you were literally translating Sattva?
Yeah. It's often what's translated as sentient beings.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go on with the examination of this view. Okay, now in section 8, the Buddha is going to make some quite definitive statements of his own. You know, this is an interesting contrast with the famous Kalama Sutta, which is often quoted when anybody wants to introduce Buddhism to a non-Buddhist. Almost the first text they cite, this is what the Buddha says in the Kalama Sutta, as though this was the authoritative Buddhist text. Whereas it's just one little sutta, middle-sized sutta, in the 2,000-page Anguttara Nikāya, and for 2,000 years, more than that, 2,300, 400 years, nobody paid any special attention to the Kalama Sutta, till some British rationalist in the late 19th century couldn't keep his discovery to himself, but he wanted to prove that the Buddha was like a 19th century British rationalist. So he said, look, see what we found. The Kalama Sutta, the Buddha doesn't make any pronouncements about karma, rebirth, anything beyond what you can see and know through your own experience. But this sutta starts off very similar to the Kalama Sutta, but here the Buddha pretty much lays down the line. By the way, there's also, I should mention that there is a Chinese counterpart to the Kalama Sutta. It's included in the Majjhima Agama of the Ahanjing. And in that sutta, it's very different from the Pali Kalama Sutta. It starts off in the same way, where the Kalamas come to the Buddha and they're quite perplexed. They don't know who to believe, what to accept. But in the Kalama Sutta translated into Chinese, the Buddha says, it's quite true that you are confused, perplexed, uncertain, because you don't have the higher knowledge to be able to distinguish what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. But I have that knowledge, and I will tell you what is good, what is bad, what is right, and what is wrong. And then the Buddha goes right ahead and tells them about the 3 unwholesome roots, 3 wholesome roots, 10 courses of unwholesome conduct, 10 types of wholesome conduct. So maybe the Pali version of the Kalama Sutta had been slipped in by a British rationalist of the 19th century. Okay, so here the Buddha is speaking quite definitively. He says, since there actually is another world, a world beyond this present one who holds the view there is no other world has wrong view. Okay, so the right view, as we'll see, is the view that there are worlds or lives beyond this present one. Since there is another world, one who intends, or I say one who forms intentions or acts on the motivation, or whose actions are motivated by the belief there is no other world, has wrong intention. Since there actually is another world, one who makes the statement, there is no other world, has wrong speech. And since there actually is another world, one who says there is no other world is opposed to those arahants, those liberated and enlightened ones who know the other world. So up to this point we have here wrong view, wrong intention, wrong speech. Those are the first 3 factors of the wrong Eightfold Path, which is the opposite of the right view, right intention, right speech, the first 3 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so some other consequences. One who says there is no other world is opposing the arhats, the ones with the superior knowledge, who know about the other world. Okay, then when one starts arguing that there is no other world, arguing with another, then one can convince him to accept what is called untrue or a bad dharma, a bad teaching. And then when one convinces the other to accept a bad teaching, then one praises oneself and disparages others. And then when one accepts this view, then any pure conduct that one had formerly possessed is abandoned, and one takes the ways, or gets led astray into corrupt behavior. Okay, so we have wrong view, wrong intention, wrong speech, opposing the noble ones, convincing another to accept a bad teaching, an untrue teaching, praising oneself, disparaging others. Okay, so these, they're called evil, unwholesome states or qualities, come into being with wrong view as their condition. Okay, so these are all bringing out the negative consequences, the undesirable consequences that follow from determining or deciding that there is no world beyond the present one, no life beyond the present one, and no working of the law of karmic cause and effect. Okay, so now in section 9, we come into the reflections of a wise person. How a wise person is going to reflect on deciding between these two opposed views. This is a person who's intelligent, reasonable, but isn't able to see and know for himself whether or not there are lives beyond the present one, whether or not there is a law of karmic causation, of moral causation. This, we could say that this is where the Buddhist counterpart of Pascal's wager comes in. Okay, here the wise person considers, okay, if there is no other world, then on the dissolution of the body, this good person will have made himself safe enough. That is the person who accepts the wrong view. So he says there is no other world beyond this present one. There is no other world. And so in that respect, he's safe. He doesn't have to face any undesirable consequences. But if there is another world beyond the present one, then on the dissolution of the body after death, he'll be reborn in one of the bad realms, even in hell. That is, assuming the person not only holds that there's no life beyond the present one, but on the basis of that wrong view, he engages in wrong actions, wrong intentions, and leaves upon wholesome behavior and engages in unwholesome behavior. Okay, so the person behaves in unwholesome, unvirtuous ways, and since there is a life beyond the present one, after death, he is reborn in one of the unfortunate realms, one of the bad realms. Okay, so now this person reflects whether or not the word of those good teachers is true. Let me assume there is no other world. Okay, so if there is no other world, this good person who adopts this view will be censored by the wise as an immoral person, one of wrong view who holds the doctrine of nihilism. In Indian society in the Buddhist time, it was considered the respectable thing for an upright, virtuous citizen to accept the belief in rebirth and in the law of karma. It's a little bit like if you're living in Middle America, small town Middle America, where everybody goes to church on Sunday, and if you're just seen hanging around the streets on Sunday and people ask, why aren't you going to church? Then you say, well, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in any life beyond the present one. Then people start chatting and avoiding you, and they look down on you, and they say, he's an atheist, a sinner, going to hell. So that's the way you would be treated. I guess in Indian society, in the Buddhist way, if you explicitly denied any belief in lives beyond the present one, then you will be censored as an immoral person, one of wrong view. Okay, so these are the consequences, even if there is no other world. Okay, on the other hand, if there is another world, then this person who adopts this belief in nihilism has made an unlucky throw. It's really using the analogy, the metaphor of gambling. He's made an unlucky throw on both counts. First, in this life itself, he's criticized by the wise as being an immoral, stupid person. And then on the dissolution of the body after death, he is reborn in a bad state of rebirth. And so by reflecting in this way, then this person has, or by acting in this way, this person has wrongly accepted and undertaken this incontrovertible teaching in such a way that extends only to one side and it excludes the wholesome alternative. Okay, so this is what happens with the one who holds the view, there is no other world. So if there is no other world, then he doesn't have to worry about his fate after death. But if there is another world, then he has something to worry about. He goes to a bad realm. If there is no other world, still he's blamed by the wise as being an immoral person. But if I've lost my reasoning here. But if there is another world, if there is another world, then he goes to the bad destination after death, and he is blamed by the wise in this life itself. Okay, maybe anybody have any questions about this reasoning here, or any comments?
Just a question. The phrase, it extends only to one side.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. And how it excludes. Well, he's assuming there that if you don't have the right belief about rebirth and an afterlife, that then you'll be an evil person, kind of like Dostoevsky's assumption that if there is no God, everything is permissible, and so people will just eat each other.
I think the point, he has wrongly accepted and undertaken this incontrovertible teaching in such a way that it extends only to one side and excludes the wholesome alternative. I think the point here is that his line of reflection will be justifiable only insofar as if there is no other world, then on the dissolution after death, he doesn't have to go to a bad destination. In other words, as said in the first sentence of this paragraph, then on the dissolution of the body, this good person will have made himself safe enough. So that is the one side in which he protects himself. But if there is another world, even if there is no other world, then he still gets into trouble because he's blamed and criticized by others, so he loses out on that front. But again, if there is another world, then he loses out on both fronts. So you could say that there are actually 4 consequences. If there is no other world, what happens after death, and how do people treat one in this life? If there is another world, what happens after death, and how do people regard one in this life? So of these 4 possible consequences, if, he asserts there is no life after death, he only gets 1 out of the 4. That is, he doesn't have to face a rebirth in hell after death, but he still has to face 3 bad consequences. Whereas if there is the life after death, then he loses out on 3 fronts, actually 2 fronts. He gets the bad rebirth, we're uncertain whether or not there is a life after death. So if he asserts there is no life after death, then he wins only in 1 out of the 4 possibilities, in that he doesn't have to face an unhappy rebirth. But still, he's criticized in this life. There's still the possibility that there is another life, so that he'll have to face a bad rebirth. And he'll be blamed by others. I'm not sure that I was completely clear about that. Okay, maybe we'll take the next section here. Okay, now this is going to take the positive counterpart. This is the view of what I call affirmationism, Atikavada. So here we have the recluses and Brahmins who hold the view that there is what is given, there's offerings, there's charity, and so on. There are good and virtuous ascetics who have realized the nature of this world and could teach it on the basis of their direct knowledge. Okay, now what is the effect of that belief on their conduct? It's expected that they will avoid 3 types of bad conduct: bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct, and that they'll undertake and practice 3 types of wholesome conduct: good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct. And the reason is because these ascetics see in unwholesome qualities the danger, degradation, and defilement, and they see in wholesome qualities, in wholesome states, the blessing of renunciation, the aspect of cleansing. Okay, now the Buddha is going to follow through additional consequences of their belief. And here again he lays down definite statements about what is right and what is wrong. So he says, since there actually is another world, one who holds the view there is another world has right view. So this is the elementary form of right view, is accepting the existence of a life after death and accepting the law of karmic causation, the effects of good and bad deeds. Okay, since there actually is another world, one who intends, or maybe more fully, one who acts on one whose actions are motivated by the belief that there is another world, has right intention. So when one accepts the belief that there are lives beyond the present one, then one will be careful in what kind of motives one allows to serve as the springs of one's activities. Okay, since there actually is another world, one who makes the statement, there is another world, has right speech. So this is one type of right speech, is affirming the existence of lives beyond the present one, the existence of rebirth and the operation of karma. Okay, then since there is another world, one who says there is another world is speaking in harmony with the view of the arhats who know for themselves the other world. And then when one accepts the belief in another world, then if one convinces another that there is another world, one is convincing him to accept true Dhamma or a good teaching. And then because one convinces another to accept a true teaching, one does not praise oneself and disparage others. I think it's possible, to convince another in argument. You have an argument whether there are lives beyond the present one, whether there's karma causation. It seems to me that you could convince another to accept that, and if he accepts it, one could become proud and then start boasting about oneself and disparaging other beliefs. Is that true, or am I a little mistaken about that?
Of course it's true. It's the oldest story in the book.
Excuse me?
It's the oldest story in the book.
Yeah. Why do you say it's the oldest story in the book?
Oh, come on. World history on take it should replete with horrible religious leaders. Horrible religious people. World history doesn't matter what culture you go with. They're good people. I'm not saying that they're not good people.
Yeah.
But there's just, I could give you story after stories, whether you're looking at whatever religion, whatever culture, whether you go back in time or even into the present. Mm-hmm. It's just the way of things. It's people, unfortunately, and what they do with things.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of In Sri Lanka in the 19th century, there was a famous debate that took place at a city or town called Panadura. It's known as the Panadura debate. At that time, Christianity was very strong in Sri Lanka because there had been the first wave of Catholic missionaries sent over by the Portuguese. Then in the 19th century, when the British established a strong presence there, they supported the Christian missionaries, and so many of the upper middle class, Sinhalese, well, both Sinhalese and Tamils, converted to Christianity. And it was considered almost like the respectable thing for any upright member of the upper class to become a Christian. But the great majority, or at least the majority of people in the country, especially in the countryside, the small towns, were still the Buddhists. And the contention between the two religions, non-violent, but still taking the form of polemics, debates, reached a point where a famous debate was held in the town of Panadura between a Christian minister, I think from the Anglican Church, and a Buddhist monk who was fluent in English and very knowledgeable about, he had studied Christianity for the purpose of engaging it in debate. And so the two had a debate. I tried to read a record of the debate, and it was really difficult for me to follow the arguments. They just seemed so obscure. But the general consensus was that the Buddhist monk, Gunananda, I think was his name, won the debate. And the Buddhists throughout Sri Lanka were in an uproar. It wasn't that they didn't pride themselves or their representative or disparage others, but they were, I think, at the end of the debate, they lifted the monk up on their shoulders and carried him around the town, applauding. So we see human emotions seem to be pretty much the same. Then eventually word of that debate, somehow it got into the newspaper, which came into an American newspaper, which came, it was, a report about the debate was published in an American newspaper, and there was an American gentleman named Henry Stale Olcott, who is one of the co-founder of the Theosophical Society, living in New Jersey, who read the report of that debate, and he and the founder of the Theosophical Society, Madam H.P. Blavatsky, they decided they had to go to Sri Lanka to support the Buddhists. And so they arrived in the town of Gaul on a ship, having written in advance saying that they wanted to receive the 3 refuges and 5 precepts and become officially Buddhists, which they did. And this sent waves of exhilaration through Sri Lanka that 2 white people from the West have come to our shores just in the midst of this period where this bitter contention between the Christians and the Buddhists, and they've embraced Buddhism. Of course, they went on to interpret it very much along their own theosophical lines, but this was a big boost to the religious pride of the Sri Lankan Buddhists. Excuse me? Oh, this is recording. Okay. Okay, so anyway, just continuing with the text. So it says, he does not praise himself and disparage others. I guess this will be a person who has some degree of control over his mind, and doesn't let himself be swept away by ordinary human emotions. Okay, so any corrupt conduct that he formerly had engaged in is abandoned, and pure virtue is substituted. And this right view, right intention, right speech, first 3 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, non-opposition to noble ones, to the arahants, convincing another to accept true dharma, avoiding self-praise and disparagement of others, these several wholesome qualities common to being with right view as their condition. So based on the view that there is another world beyond the present one, that there is, that there are results of good and bad actions, then all of these other wholesome states arise. Okay, now we come to the method by which a wise person reflects on this view. Okay, again, this is the converse side of the Pascal's wager, the Buddhist version of Pascal's wager. If there is another world, then with the breakup of the body after death, this good person, the one who accepts this view, will be reborn in a happy destination because he has good karmic forces behind him, right view, right intention, right speech, and so on. Okay, so now he says, whether or not the word of these good ascetics, the good teachers, is true, let me assume that there is no other world, that there is no other life. Still, this good person who acts on the supposition that there is another world will be praised by the wise as a good person, one who holds right view, the doctrine of affirmation. And actually, these are even big, sort of loaded words in India to this day. The two words in Sanskrit, they're still known by their Sanskrit forms. So the word that's translated rather awkwardly, one who holds the doctrine of affirmation, this in Sanskrit is astika. And sort of any decent person in India, even today, is expected to be an astika, one who affirms belief in other realms. Whereas the opposite of that, one who, we have that in paragraph 9. Again, it's rather awkwardly expressed in the middle of paragraph 9. One who holds the doctrine of nihilism. In Sanskrit, it's nastika. And just like the Sanskrit nastika suggests in English the word nasty. I don't know if there's any connection between the two words, but to be called nastika is a very nasty designation. It's like being called, maybe today people speak about, at least in Middle America, they'll speak with horrors, the atheist. If one is a nastika, it means one is upsetting, challenging the whole social structure, the whole structure on which society rests. You know, if you're a nastika, you probably kill your children and eat them for dinner. Or at least people will spread rumors about the nastika. Exactly like the word, being called a terrorist today. Okay, so assuming that there is no other world, still the person who believes that there is will be respected by others as a virtuous person. He is an astika, one who has an affirmative outlook on life, so to speak. On the other hand, if there is another world, then this person who holds the view of another world has made the lucky throw on both counts. He's praised by the wise here and now, and then on the dissolution of the body after death, because he holds right view, forms right intentions, speaks rightly, and engages in good actions based on his view, then he will likely be reborn in a happy destination, even in the heavenly world. And so he's rightly accepted and undertaken this incontrovertible teaching in such a way that it extends to both sides and excludes the wholesome alternative. Okay, maybe at this point then I'll ask whether there's any questions. Please. We used to have what I call the floating microphone, the hand microphone. Maybe it's not. Okay, please go ahead and ask. Just speak loudly.
I sort of have a question. You said it was the Buddhists in India, right, that would like chastise or basically censor someone who wouldn't believe in higher realms.
Say again.
You said it was the Buddhists in India that would basically censor somebody for not believing in the higher realms.
It would be the general outlook in society, not a particular person, but it would be the general outlook was that one would be expected to believe in things like rebirth and other realms of existence. So if one didn't accept that view, people would look on him as being a person of wrong view, someone they would suspect one of being a person of immoral behavior.
So that was the people, right? That was the people.
It was a general opinion, yeah. Yeah, Tracy.
I'm curious about your view. There are a couple of contemporary British lay teachers.
Contemporary?
British lay teachers.
Yeah.
Stephen Batchelor is one of the most celebrated.
Yeah.
And John Peacock were really making a career almost out of their... Batchelor has a book called Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist. Where he takes that Kalama Sutta almost as if, as you said, it's the center of Buddhist teachings. It presents the Buddhist not just as a rationalist, but like the first existentialist person of no belief. I've been curious for a long time, having just heard Peacock recently, what your view is of this, of presenting the Buddha like we've had it wrong all along. And he really never said he believed in any next world.
If they're I don't know John Peacock's writing, I know Stephen Batchelor's writing, and it's a little ambiguous what Stephen Batchelor's understanding of Buddha. Sometimes he seems to be saying that the Buddha, basically what he seems to be saying is that the Buddha just accepted the teachings of karma and rebirth as part of the Indian cultural baggage, but his teaching of, say, the Four Noble Truths, 3 characteristics, the practice of mindfulness, that he uses the expression of pragmatic, existential therapy, something like that, which can still be valid even if one completely casts away those teachings which come from the Indian heritage. What I would say, I don't want to dismiss that view out of hand. What I would definitely reject is the view that this is actually representing what the Buddha himself taught. Because if you look at the all of the Buddha's texts that have come down from all the schools through the centuries, even going back to the oldest texts like the Nikāyas, the Agamas, it's very clear that the Buddha taught, based on his own direct experience, the working of the law of karmic causation, the existence of other realms of existence, and the process of rebirth by which one goes from one realm to another. So if one says that the Buddha didn't teach this, or this was just part of the Indian cultural heritage, it's quite definitely contradicted by what one finds in the texts. It could be that they are just using this method because they know that disbelief in any kind of rebirth, other realms of existence is widespread in contemporary Western society. And so they might be seeing this as a way to present the Buddha's teachings and practices as a way sort of to get a foothold and to make them convincing to contemporary skeptics. If they're using the teaching in that way, it's still not my own approach, but I would say that it has a certain justification. But I think if one really wants to come to what I would call a broad, comprehensive, and faithful understanding of the Buddha's teaching, definitely one has to bring in, I would say, the whole range of teachings. And one especially finds in the Nikāyas that the teaching of karmic causation, other realms of existence, or at least of rebirth beyond the present existence, is taken to be a form of samadhi, of right view. And so this is really like a foundation for what I would say the full depth and range of even the liberating right view. For that liberating right view to be able to culminate in true liberation, it should be based upon the sort of elementary or foundational right view of karmic causation and rebirth.
Yeah,
Okay, you can take the microphone.
I have aversion to this thing. Tracy, further to your point, there's a great sort of big divide in the Buddhist world, especially if you look online and look on certain web boards. There's the literal rebirthers. This is a big thing, actually, Bhante. Your name has come up.
I don't go onto these discussion groups.
Yeah, and there are the...
Occasionally I peeked in, and when it comes to, what is the expression used here? He does not praise himself and disparage others. I don't know about praising themselves, but I've seen myself disparaged pretty badly. Please continue.
Okay, and there are the literal rebirthers, like, yes, there's literal rebirth, and the you're stupid, that's not what it really means, and they don't just like, the English dudes, including Bachelor, but also Buddhadasa, the great Buddhadasa, was according to his readings, and I haven't read a lot of him, and I'm really paraphrasing, I'm being very simple right now, is, well, that's a teaching for babies. There's nothing to be reborn. So essentially they're saying there's no rebirth, or no literal rebirth.
Yeah.
And what are you talking about? And then you take away the whole underpinnings of Buddhism, because then what is the point? I mean, you're getting down to nihilism, quite frankly.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm an expert. And the reason why, if you've noticed, Bhante, over the months, is what is this? Is this really being? You've noticed that I keep on asking you whenever the word being comes up in English. I asked you this before. What's the palette? It's a literal translation. Because these people say the word being is never used. Okay, they get into it. There's no such thing. It's never ever said in the palette. The anti-literal rebirth. It's a really big deal. They get almost hysterical about it. And if you cite, well, Gandhi there's all the way over in this Nikāya and in that Nikāya, he's talking about rebirth and hell, well, that's not what it really says, or that's an interpolation, or you're just imagining it. So it's like every so often, I don't know if you've been hearing about something like, Bhante, what's this word? Because I really want to know. So it's a really big, huge, emotional...
I know.
They cite the Buddhadasa a lot, because he's much more authoritative than Steve Batchelor.
Yeah, I had read years ago a couple of books by Ajahn Buddhadasa, And I have to say, I just didn't see how he could be so widely respected as, they say, the greatest Thai scholar monk of the 20th century. But there was just so much that seemed to be wrong and arbitrary.
What did find is when you read it, I mean, that's when I read it, it's like, well, what, am I reading something that's so totally different? How come I'm reading Yi? Yeah, it's just, we've had people on, I belong to a Theravada web board. These are good, very serious people. A lot of them are actually down under. They study with, what is it, Goenka? Or
Goenka,
yeah. A lot of them are very serious people. Sometimes we have the anti-rebirthers. And we have a few scholars who could actually really read Pali and things like that and say, look, and they'll actually bring up, the Pali and explain. I can't get that far, but it's a big deal. So it's good that you brought it up. People should it's a huge thing.
Yeah. Ajahn Buddhadasa's line was that when the texts speak about rebirth into different realms, what they're actually speaking about are changes in states of mind. So there's no real rebirth from this body into another body, but when it speaks about being reborn as an animal or a hungry ghost or in hell, it just means that the state of mind changes.
I know Ajahn Sumedho, this has been brought up, if you read his teachings, he takes, I guess, a good middle ground approach. It's like, it certainly can mean that.
It certainly what?
It certainly can mean that. We can become, right now, here and now, an angry ghost, or it can certainly happen. But who's to say it can't happen on another realm as well? And then Ajahn Sumedho says, but don't get lost in that. The point is, the practice. Because he doesn't like, you get into the speculation, and you end up not practicing.
Yeah, but I think, well, first of all, about Buddhadasa's contention that what is meant is the change in mental states. If one looks at the text again and again where it's describing what happens in rebirth, it says, Kayasa Veda Param Marana, which means with the dissolution of the body after death.
Right.
I mean, so obviously it's not just speaking about a state of mind, but leaving behind one body.
You're not reading that right on table. You must not be translating it right according to them.
Oh, really? I don't know how to.
You're relying too much on the commentary.
Is any of them offering? Maybe I could register to take a Pali course with one of them. Learn how to translate properly. Okay, so it's Kayasa Veda Paranmarana. So definitely, that was the first point. The words are very clear, very straightforward.
It's not just the English translation.
It's not there's no other way to translate that expression, unless one has a very original style of translation. And then the other point, as far as the practice goes, the Buddha doesn't just teach being mindful of the present in order to understand what's going on in one's mind or in one's present experience. But the practice also includes ethical behavior. And the way he lays out the map for understanding I use the expression, the ontological foundations for ethics, the factors of the laws of existence that provide a basis for ethical conduct. It is the law of karma operating from life to life, which forms the underpinning to ethical behavior. So of course one can be ethical without believing in karma and rebirth, but the way the Buddha sees actions having an impact upon oneself over the long range, to get the long-range perspective on the impact of one's behavior on oneself, one has to bring in that wider dimension of multiple lives, multiple realms of existence. I sometimes use the analogy What is that? What is that? Who said bird? Actually, what I drew is the sky with a bird flying through it. To see it as a bird, to see the lines as a bird, you have to take account of, well, the white space behind it. And so to see the significance of our actions, it's not enough just to focus on the present actuality, but one has to see them against the broad background. And then the broad background for Buddhism is the working of karmic causation, the law of karmic causation. Okay, I think we'll have to stop now, and we'll end with this, and then I'll continue with this next week, with the sutta next week, and we could continue with some discussion after lunch from about maybe 12:10 on. If anybody has any questions or wants to discuss some of these points further, we can meet back here at 12:10. And that will end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the deities, the Buddhas or fear spirits, the Nagas, the dragon spirits, and with all sentient beings. Akasatat, let me do it the fast way. Akasatat Bhumata Deva Naga Mehetika Punyantang Anubodipa Chirang Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Bhumata Deva Naga Mehetika Punyantang Padaya Vichitato Etanture Satakari Papana Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Mi